not exactly a secret that the Sonic series has an amazing repertoire of locations, and I should know, since I've already made a video on that exact topic where I covered my favorite areas from these 4 games. And since a lot of you seemed to really enjoy that, I figured that it only made sense to make a follow-up video and shine some light on a new assortment of neat locations. Also, for the sake of keeping variety in the location choices, I've given myself the same restriction as last time, which means that I'm only allowed to highlight 1 location per game. But that's my only rule. So, with that established, let's jump right to it with my first game of choice. When it comes to the graphics of Sonic Forces, I have conflicted but mostly positive thoughts. Like, it may not be one of my favorite looking Sonic games, but I also think that when it looks good, it looks really good. For those curious, my main critique of this game's visuals is how blocky all of the terrain is. But besides that, I think that this game has a great visual presentation that is full of attention to detail in a lot of places. And of course, not every stage has equal amounts of care put into them, but I also think that you'd be surprised at just how much is going on in each stage should you choose to stop and smell the roses. Regardless, I believe this game to have a great lineup of stages, but there is definitely one that stands above the rest for me. Metropolis, or Metropolitan Highway, is easily my favorite location in Sonic Forces. I genuinely love how it looks. Every building is designed in interesting ways that don't always make sense from an architectural standpoint and yet still succeed in creating both a dynamic and appealing interpretation of a futuristic city. Which is, of course, only aided by the iconic neon displays with random gibberish symbols on them. Big fan of those. You know, I've always felt that this area was very reminiscent of the kind of visuals you'd see in the Sonic Riders games. In fact, it especially reminds me of that city you see in the opening and closing cinematics of Sonic Riders Zero Gravity, which I've since learned is named Monopole, so do what you will with that information. There's even flying cars that you can see going around Metropolis, which only further helps the 2 places feel so similar. Though Metropolis definitely looks better in my opinion, with it essentially feeling like a more realized version of Monopole. Like, check out these metal tree-looking things. I don't know what to call them, but they sure are satisfying to look at and genuinely add a lot to the area in terms of giving it some life. Also, fun fact that isn't actually a fact about these metal tree things is that I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be mini futuristic windmills. Because it looks as if their leaves, so to speak, are being turned by the wind, right? They also have these glowing green dots on their stem that just so happen to perfectly line up with the glowing green gates that are clearly pulsating with energy which can only be found on the pathways that are filled with these metal tree things. It's just a theory that these are windmills, of course, but I think it has some weight to it. Speaking of small details that I'm a fan of, I noticed while making this video that in any moment where the road has no railing, there does exist a tiny but still visible indicator that attempts to warn you of the danger of falling off, which you can see in the form of this pulsating red light that you may notice on the edges of the road here. While I really like small details like this, I definitely find it a shame that this effect is so hard to spot. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if most of you had never noticed this effect before today. But hey, at least you know now. Another detail of this stage that I'm a fan of is that if you, for some reason, choose to leave this batch of robot ostriches alive, then when they eventually reach the bridge that is blocking their way, they do a little hop to get over it. That completely caught me by surprise when I discovered it, because I had no idea that they could do this. And after a bit of testing, I discovered that this does in fact seem to be the only moment in the entire game where these guys jump over anything. Which makes this a weirdly unique interaction that I have since come to appreciate thoroughly. Metropolis as a whole is a brilliant looking futuristic location, full of attention to detail anywhere that you look, and I'd honestly love to see this location return in a future game if given the opportunity. But for now, we can only say farewell, as it's time to move on to the next game. I've been looking forward to this one, because Sonic Generations is an incredible looking game, and definitely one of my favorites aesthetically. I don't know how Sonic Team managed to so flawlessly reimagine and modernize these past Sonic levels, and yet somehow they did it, and almost made it look easy. Which, of course, resulted in this game being one huge love letter to the Sonic franchise as a whole. A fact that makes this game a fairly interesting one for this video, since the stages that it presents were considered the best of the best from the Sonic franchise up to that point. And as you might imagine, this made picking my favorite a genuinely difficult task due to the lineup being so strong. But after a whole lot of back and forth, I did eventually reach my answer. Some of you may have expected Seaside Hill, or maybe even Green Hill, and honestly, I was too. They were both really strong contenders, but after going back through every stage, Sky Sanctuary has got to be my favorite in this game aesthetically. And I suppose that shouldn't be too surprising. After all, it's a collection of floating ruins that are suspended in the sky. How could I not pick it? It also helps, of course, that the stage just looks beautiful, to the point where I would easily call it one of my favorite Sonic locations. And I think that goes to show just how much of a glow up this stage got, because no shade to the original, it's the OG and looked great given the technical limitations of the time, but oh my goodness, it is night and day between these two versions. See, when it was first introduced, Sky Sanctuary felt kind of empty and devoid of life, despite some moss and vines. And there were hints of advanced technology left behind in the form of the teleporters, but that's about as far as that idea went. And I can tell what Sonic Team were going for. They created a great vibe for the crumbled ruins of a past civilization. But this new, reimagined version of Sky Sanctuary manages to keep those core ideas while also breathing some fresh air into them. The first difference between the two versions is that there is now much more plant life. There's the addition of trees, flowers, bushes, really just about everything. And I think that altogether they do a brilliant job at giving the area some life. Like, I can understand why some may prefer the sparse, empty feeling of the original, but I for one thoroughly appreciate the visual variety that came with the newly added plant life. However, the greenery isn't all that's helping this area feel so much more alive than before. I think the water streams that you can find in various spots do a similarly great job on that front. I wish that there were more of them, but the ones that you can spot add to the area a ton. And same goes for the colorful array of parrots that are sadly even more sparse. It's another case where it would be nice if there were more, but the fact that they're even there in the first place is an appreciated touch. Another addition to the sanctuary that you may have noticed is all the pulsating lights that you can see running through the also newly added glass panes and dark stone. Additions that I would say do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of adding contrast, as well as somehow adding even more intrigue to the already intriguing location. And in my time recording footage, I found that the pulsating lights specifically, I happened to find really satisfying to look at, which led to me recording way too much footage showcasing the different places that feature it, because every time I came across the effect, I couldn't help but record a few shots of it. For the sake of time, I sadly can't show all of that footage, but I hope that what I am showing of it is doing the effect some justice. I honestly recorded too much footage of this stage in general, as I filmed over 30 minutes of cinematic shots, which is a little overkill given how long this segment of the video is. But I suppose that goes to show just how much I like and appreciate this interpretation of Sky Sanctuary. Sadly though, I really should be getting on to the next game, so let's move on. Sonic and the Black Knight is similar to Secret Rings in the fact that it's yet another storybook game. Though this time around, Sonic was transported into the stories of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, which naturally led to this game's aesthetic being a very medieval one, and it was pulled off very well too, with the game looking amazing given the hardware it was made for. A trait that I'd argue is true for every Sonic game made for the Wii, but that doesn't make it any less special, because what it set out to do, I'd argue that it did really well, and that deserves some kudos. In terms of what I consider my favorite location from the game, the obvious choice is Avalon. Or at least I wish I could say that, because fun fact, Avalon is quite literally Ireland on the map selection screen, and since I'm Irish, I have a bias. Go figure. But sadly, Avalon is nothing more than a boss arena, so instead I opted for a more fleshed out location. I had a surprising amount of back and forth before settling on Deep Woods. Molten Mine was originally a strong contender, as was Crystal Cave, but while researching I found out that they surprisingly had an unfair advantage. Because when you're playing through the story, you get to play through the entirety of both of those stages. Which sounds like it should be a given, but with Deep Woods, you actually don't. See, if you just play the story missions, then this is the ending that you'll recognize for Deep Woods. But the stage has more to offer, as seen in the optional Head for the Goal mission. And while there isn't a ton extra, there was enough of a bonus for this area to become my favorite location. I'm getting a little ahead of myself though, let's take a step back to view the area as a whole. The part about Deep Woods that I like the most is its subtle environmental storytelling. See, once you notice the forest, the first thing you'll spot is obviously the massive tree in the center of it. But you may also notice that besides that, the forest appears to be almost entirely normal looking, and yet the existence of that big tree raises questions. Is this a normal forest that just so happens to have a huge tree in the middle of it? Or is there more to this forest than meets the eye? You don't have to wait long to get your answer, of course, as once you hop on this conveniently placed horse ride, you rapidly begin approaching the forest. And once you've reached its outskirts, you may take notice in the gradual change in lighting, as well as the colors of the trees as you continue to go deeper into the forest. More specifically, the trees have gone from green to blue. And for the record, I'm worried this color change may have been nothing more than a stylized way of making the forest appear darker in its denser sections. But the use of blue rather than, say, darker green is what makes me think that Sonic Team intended to make the forest have an air of mystery about it the deeper that you go. Which is only reinforced by the fact that the forest quite literally gets more magical as you go through it. At first it's just the blue trees with the occasional glowing blue flower, but later on you'll find this area that has a pink coloration to it as well as even more glowing plants. And even later again, this area is outdone by this swamp section that contains the most glowing plants by far. I really like this progressively mystical vibe that the Deep Woods has going on, but there's more to like about the area than just that. For example, in this part of the stage, you can see the place where you meet the Lady of the Lake within the story. And one detail that I never noticed before this video is that this tree appears to be her house, as there's stairs leading up to it as well as a door. And what can I say, I'm a fan of details like that. Other highlights of this stage include the multiple settlements you pass through that are filled with charm and fit the medieval vibe of the game perfectly. I especially like the chickens in them that react to your movement. Another part of the stage I like is near the end of it, where there's this cool set piece that requires you to cut down the masts off some broken bridges in order to traverse past some steep drops. And for the record, this area, as well as the magical swamp from earlier, are both parts of the area that were completely absent in all the mandatory story missions of Deep Woods. Which is definitely a shame, but at least you can still experience them in an easily unlockable level. I should also mention that while this area should technically be the end of Deep Woods, there does also exist an alternate version of this stage named Shrouded Forest that only appears near the end of the game. And as you can see, the whole location has been given a complete makeover, with it looking like it's been covered in snow, though I believe what's actually happening is that the ground has been coated with a layer of spores, as indicated by the effect you can see emanating from the ground. This was likely caused due to these massive flowers that have sprung up everywhere, and they seem to be affecting the plant life too, as the forest has started coming alive with vines shooting out of the ground and even sentient trees that try to attack you. All in all, Shrouded Forest is a really interesting alternate take on Deep Woods, and I love that it took the magical aspects of the stage and completely ran with it, transforming it into almost an entirely different location, while still keeping that familiar feeling. And while I'd love to keep talking about Deep Woods and all of the details that I like about it, I also think it's about time I moved on to the next game. In my opinion, Sonic Heroes is in an interesting place in regards to its visuals, because it was clearly attempting to bridge the gap between the more realistic visuals of the Sonic Adventure games and the more fantastical visuals of the classic Sonic games. This is most obviously seen in Seaside Hill, which feels like a combination of the classic Green Hill and the Adventure Emerald Coast, which just so happen to be the first stages of each era respectively. This may have just been a coincidence, of course, but I think it's a good showcase of how Sonic Heroes took cues from both the adventure and the classic games with its visuals. Another quirk of this game that resembles the classics is how it structures its levels, since each area has 2 levels and a boss fight that all take place within the same area. Though the visuals and gimmicks are tweaked in between the stages to help each one feel unique, and they are even given different names. Though despite that, I'd still consider stages like Rail Canyon and Bullet Station to be in the same location. And so, with that in mind, my favorite overall location in Sonic Heroes is, of course, Some of you may consider it ironic that I've chosen arguably the least vibrant location in this game as my favorite, but what can I say? Hang Castle and Mystic Mansion are just really interesting places to me that somewhat took me by surprise because, fun fact, I played through this game for the very first time in order to have this segment of the video. And before doing so, I at least vaguely knew about every other stage in the game beforehand. And yet I somehow had never heard of these two. Or if I had, I never paid them much attention. I was missing out though. This is a cool location that I've since come to thoroughly appreciate. Now, since the area is split in two, I'll start by talking about Hang Castle, aka the exterior section. At a first glance, this stage is nothing more than an evil-looking castle high in the sky, with an overhang of a massive orange moon. And it's a great vibe that already would have been good on its own, but it's elevated by the fact that there's more to it than meets the eye. See, as you progress through the stage, you'll soon find an orb, and once you touch it, the entire stage turns upside down. Which I suppose is simple enough in concept, but I find it especially cool since there are parts of the stage where you'll be going through it without much thought, only to later find yourself traveling through the exact same area but upside down. A lot of the appeal of this for me is how smoothly integrated it is. Like, if you're really looking for it, you should be able to spot the upside down pathway before you reach it. But it's also not done in such an obvious way that you will spot it unless you really look out for it, which I appreciate. Hang Castle has such a mysteriously intriguing vibe, full of spots that made for some footage that I'm really happy with. And if I had to choose between it and the other half of the area that I've yet to get to, then this area would likely take the cake. But still, part of what makes this area my favorite is when looking at the strengths of both of its halves put together. So, let's move on from the exterior to the interior, aka Mystic Mansion. This half of the zone essentially feels like a haunted manor, full of twists and turns and plenty of secrets to uncover. Which already makes it quite unique, but it stands out even more due to taking place almost entirely indoors. Which is a far cry from the vast open spaces of literally every other stage in this game. I like this distinction, as it evokes a vague feeling of being trapped with the need to escape. That of course suits the vibe of a haunted mansion perfectly. In a similar fashion to Hang Castle, this stage also holds a gimmick surrounding the orbs. Though rather than them switching gravity, every orb is now individualized, with them each having a unique effect that messes with the level geometry in some way or another. For example, early in the stage you'll find a set of doors with seemingly nothing behind them, but if you interact with the nearby orb, then a room will suddenly appear behind them. Another example lies here, where you enter a room with paintings that clearly depict various Eggman robots, and if you touch this nearby orb, then lo and behold, they jump out of the paintings and begin attacking you. I'd say that stuff like this is definitely the coolest part of the stage, but I also wanted to give kudos to the underground cave area that you travel through, because parts of that are super interesting to look at, especially from a free cam view. I also wanted to point out that once you've finally made it to the end of the stage, there's this small but still fulfilling area where you briefly get your one and only outside view of the stage and its surprisingly nice garden. As for some final words on Hang Castle and Mystic Mansion, all I'll say is that while both are great looking stages in their own right, it's definitely the fantastic air of mystery about them that puts them above other Sonic Heroes stages for me. With us now approaching the end of the video, I feel the need to say that if you enjoyed it and want to see more videos just like it, then feel free to subscribe. Because if this video gets as positive of a reception as the last one, then I'm thinking of making this a video series of mine, where I continue highlighting locations that I find neat. Some of which will be Sonic, of course, but maybe not all of which will need to be, as I think this video series could also be interesting for other franchises too, like say Zelda or Mario. But who knows as to what the future holds. For now, all I'm going to say is thank you very much for watching this video, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.